everybody. This is Brian O'Haron. I decided to do some getting things done programs over the next few weeks until the budget's approved or not, and maybe up through the election if I have the energy. Not easy when you're at my age. Tonight most of our program will be about robbing Peter to pay Paul. I'll be showing you some quilts, and they're all based upon the pattern that they have in the quilt making world called Robbing Peter to Pay Paul. You've probably heard the phrase, rob Peter to pay Paul. And many of you, in the course of your lifetime, one way or another, have probably robbed Peter to pay Paul by taking money from your savings account to cover a debt in your checking account, or pouring soda from one glass to another to make the amounts even to appease your children. It is thought that the original phrase came from King Edward VI, who ordered St. Peter's Church in Westminster, London, to sell some of its land in order to pay for the repair of the famous St. Paul's in London. The rob Peter to pay Paul patterns will have you robbing your scrap bins and fat quarter stash looking for the perfect fabric to make a quilt your way. The way robbing Peter to pay Paul quilts are made is you take a little from here and a little from there and a little from an old shirt, maybe a piece of pants, maybe a bedspread, and you make the patterns and you make a quilt, the rob Peter to pay Paul fashion. We're going to switch now to another pattern. We have a few patterns with us tonight while I speak behind them. So we're going to talk a bit about budgeting improperly during difficult times. Based upon the information disclosed over the last 3 or 4 months, it is believed that the town has secretly, well, almost secretly, been losing money for the last 10 years by not budgeting properly for the outstanding bond principal and interest and possibly other expenses that would come due each year. On our last Planning for Success program, we talked about a responsible approach to budgeting. That program will be repeated. You'll be able to see it again, and then it'll be up on the charter website, ctv13.net. Rather than budgeting for the expenses and trimming other budget expenses to balance the budget, they robbed Peter to pay Paul by taking the money from various town and school reserves, water and sewer, soldiers' monument, a school non-educator pension fund, the fund balance, and possibly other reserves, time will tell, to pay for the unbudgeted annual bond, principal, and expenses, and perhaps some other expenses. We know the jury's out on this. All of the information is not available to us right now. We haven't finished the audit report that's over a year late. Connecticut's asking us to hurry up and finish it, please. And we have a state investigation going on about the finances of our town by the state police. So we're going to have to wait and see as all this information comes available where we stand. I will now switch to another pattern of the rob Peter to pay Paul quilt pattern. The matter came to light in late October or early November 2012 when there was not enough money in the fund balance for the second or third year in a row to pay outstanding bills for the town and school system. The town once again had a cash flow problem that it had managed to overcome in the last few years by obtaining a delay in tuition payments as a credit from Gilbert until the following January's tax payments began to come in. We're required to pay Gilbert a certain amount each month for tuition for the students that we send to that school. For the last 2 or 3 years, we haven't been able to do that properly, and we've had to ask Gilbert for its forgiveness for a few months until we could afford to pay the tuition and whatever other expenses there were. Gilbert, in the past, has been very cooperative on that. But this year, they couldn't be for various reasons of their own. The Gilbert Board of Directors this year voted not to give the town a delay in paying for the tuitions month to month for the time necessary to pay their bills as they had in the last 2 or 3 years. Because they did not feel, I'm pretty sure, I think I heard or read somewhere, they did not feel financially comfortable in doing it. This year, as their reserves may also be low. It's tough on everybody right now, as you know, financially in the community. I might tell you here that in our town, we receive more money in the January tax payments than we do in the July tax payments. So our cash flow is a little iffy to begin with. And when you have a zero fund balance like we do now, or close to zero, some people say it's 200,000, some people say it's zero, some people say it's between, then you don't have any money to be able to pay your debts until a new tranche of money comes in January. I also think one way or another, some of the revenue from the state comes in the second half as well, January through end of June time frame. So this year, everything came to a head. As a result, many town and school vendors were told that they would have to wait until the January tax money comes in from the taxpayers of all different varieties to pay many of the bills that were outstanding. Letters went back and forth between the school and the town. Information went back and forth. People were pretty scared about the whole issue. When looking into the problem, the poor budgeting practices and the robbing from Peter's reserves to pay Paul's debts became apparent to all. The town was said to be at least $1.9 million in debt for the final quarter of the 2012 to 2013 fiscal year, and possibly in debt up to about 2.7 or 3 million or more for the last quarter of the fiscal year, which is only 3 months away. And time will tell. Time will tell as the state police investigation is complete and the audit that's over a year late is complete, and in the beginning of next fiscal year, say first quarter or second quarter, when this year's audit will be complete. So there are a lot of reasons why people say they can't get all the facts on the table immediately, because they don't have all the information that they need. Now, in my opinion, as we talked about on Planning for Success program, you have to be conservative when that happens. You have to assume the news is going to be bad. You can't assume that the news is going to be good. Now, in our past budgets, we have always assumed that things are going to be good. This year, for example, we're not getting as much revenue in as we planned to get in our budget. And we're overspending in other accounts like police overtime. I'm not against that, providing we balance it by moving money from some other account so that we end up on budget for the year, which of course now is impossible because of the huge debt that we're carrying. Now, the huge debt will make it very, very difficult to go forward because we don't have anything in the fund balance. We've got a huge debt, and we can't get much credit. And if we did get credit, it would cost a fortune for interest. But that's not possible, I wouldn't think, for quite a while to come. So we're at a point now where we're going through the process to do the next year's fiscal year's budget, 2013, 2014, and we don't have the information to do it properly. We are budgeting the wrong way, once again, instead of the right way. We are still robbing Peter to pay Paul. And as usual, the Selectmen and Finance Board have been warned by the auditors over the years, but didn't pay any attention to the warnings. Of the last few completed audits, ending in 2010-2011. The final audit, as I said before, for the year 2011-12 has yet to come. As it has been delayed for over a year for one reason or another, as the facts became apparent of our mismanagement of the budget over the years. The state is breathing down the town's neck, pushing us along to complete the audit as it is long overdue as usual. In the old days, it used to be the schools holding up the audits because we couldn't get the right information from them. They had a large turnover in financial directors over the last 10 years, probably 3 or 4. They had a temporary in there for a while. They had a lot of problems in that area. And for one reason or another, they couldn't get the information to the auditors. Over the last year or two, part of the problem has been the town's inability to get all the information over to the auditors so they could complete their audits. And of course, when the information did get to the auditors, as usual, it always raised a lot of new questions. A lot of new questions. And they had to be answered. That took time. And then once all that information came out in the open, it raised a lot of more questions. And they had to all be answered, and that all took time. Part of the reason for that is we have a lot of problems in this whole area of financial control. Number one, we have multiple computer systems. The school's on one, the town's on another. Different sets of software, different ways to run things. That's part of the problem. If we had everybody on one computer system with the same software, and I know it's not too easy to do that, but it has to be done, then we'd all have the information. We'd all be able to question the information. Now, the Taxpayers Association has been questioning the school's budgets for years and years and years. And they never get any satisfaction. They want to see a line item budget. They want to know how much is in the budget for each line item and how much has been spent. And they can never seem to get it. At one time in our history, the schools and the town shared the same computer system and the same software and all. A few years back, the school moved out and got better software and better computers, and the town stayed with what it was doing with their own information and their own software. And the town software is not really up to date. The interim finance director was appalled by the state of the software and said we needed to upgrade. And we already had the software, we just hadn't upgraded it for one reason or another. Along the way, probably comes back down to money again. You know, when you're in trouble and you're really in deep trouble, it seems to sort priorities out a bit. If you need money to upgrade the software, you'll get it. And they'll take it. They'll rob Peter to pay Paul. Now, when the new finance director came in a few days back, she wants to evolve to even better software than the interim town manager was evolving to. And that's going to cost more money, she said at the last meeting I attended where she was present. She had only been here a couple days. But evidently in Bristol, where she worked before, they had better software. My own view for getting things done would be, if we're going to buy more software now and spend money on it, let's use the school software. Let's have one software and computer system. And it isn't as easy as I'm saying. Now, I'm going to tell you a story about a former town manager who was trying to get the schools to use the same computer system as the town and vice versa. They always say that theirs is more complex than the town, and you know, I've heard all the excuses from the various superintendents. But they told this to the town manager. Now, this town manager had experience all over the world merging computer systems. He was involved with banks and financial institutions that either bought each other out or merged, and guess what? They had to resolve their computer system conflicts. They had to integrate them, and they did it. We've all integrated many, many computer systems. It can be done. But if there's an underlying fear that, well, if we integrate computer systems, the town will be able to see how the school's really spending money, and the schools will be able to see how the town's really spending money, etc., then we don't really want to merge computer systems. We want to control our own information. And that's part of the problem here. We also don't have a real good, total, end-to-end audit done in our town. We have the audit of the town, and then we have a different procedure we go through for the schools to measure into the town, and they're not really the proper audits that we need to financially manage the town. So we did have a charter change a few years ago, which said, with the school board's permission, that's where the hang-up comes, the Board of Education's permission, the finance director of the school and the town could work together and try to merge things and get them in proper functioning order to minimize a lot of the delay, a lot of the uncertainty, a lot of the unknowns. And then they could make them available to everybody to see so they could do proper budgeting and proper financial control from month to month, year to year, century to century. We seem to be in problems here across the centuries. And we could all sit down. One of our big problems here, as was stated by Selectman Fracasso when they had the big comment argument a few weeks ago, public comment argument, he said, hey, if we had all the information we need to manage the town, to manage the budget, to manage the expenses, and to manage whatever we need to do to manage, then we probably wouldn't have this much contention in our town. And when people are frustrated, they will get up and they will speak. They'll speak their mind, and sometimes they won't do it in the most conservative, graceful manner. It's kind of human nature in a way. But if they're given the information on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis, once we have the capability to do so, we don't now. I don't see how we can manage the town without the proper information, as I said on my last Planning for Success program. It's not possible. And we're far from having that. We're probably a year, 2, 3 years away from being able to set up a financial system. Now, we'll make improvements along the way from month to month and year to year, but we really won't be in the driver's seat for quite a while. It's going to take the new financial director and the financial director in the Board of Education and the school system and the ones at Gilbert quite a while to get in sync and to be able to manage from day to day and week to week on a professional basis. Under the circumstances and confusion, the finance director, who was here for about 38 years, maybe a little less or more, and was getting ready to retire, he's also very ill, was fired. And the state police began an investigation into the matter, as you all know. Now, all that police investigation information, and I hear rumors that they have compounded computers and things like that, which they do in these kind of things, need to do that. All that's going to take time. We don't know how much time. Some people say a year from its beginning, which was, say, 4 or 5 months ago. I don't know exactly when. To the type when all the information will be out in the open. It may be even be contested by the finance director, which take even more time. Appealed, one way or another. But it's going to take time. Now, some people are rumored to have been saying, well, we might have the results of the state police investigation in 2 to 3 weeks. But other people say, no, it might take much longer than that, especially when you take due process of the law into consideration. Now, we're also rumored to be planning on getting insurance money for any fraudulent matters that may have occurred. Now, I did talk to some insurance people I know in other states, and they said that, well, unless somebody walks out the door with a lot of money, you probably won't get too much from the insurance companies. That may be true or false, but that's the rumors I hear when I call around the states to people I know in the insurance business. Now, if it's a rob Peter to pay Paul scenario, which we think it is, may be, then most of that probably can't recover from insurance because that's business risk. Business as usual risk. All businesses face that problem. And from what I gather, unless the results of the state police are pretty specific and accurate and not contested, we may not get any money from the insurance companies, or we may get very little. Now, of course, when all the facts are known, maybe we're not in as bad shape as we think we are. But again, if you're trying to get things done, you have to assume the worst. You have to be conservative. You can't be looking for the silver lining. It may show up, but you can't plan on it for the next year, 2 or 3. An interim finance director, Jane Wall, very good lady, recommended by Bloom Shapiro and Associates, our past auditors for many years. She's a CPA. She recommended by the auditors, was hired for a period of 6 months or so, and began to study the circumstances in our finance department and make recommendations, such as upgrading the accounting software. And she made one very, very important recommendation: not to count, this was in a public selectmen meeting that's recorded, and you can probably see it on the charter website, not to count on much more revenue for the foreseeable future. That's what she said. She said, well, it might be 1%, it might be 2% 1 year, and it might not be anything. And as we go on now, it looks more like it's not going to be anything until somebody can prove that it will be 1, 2, or more %. And just 1 year is helpful, but you really need it, grow it over a few years. So she said that not to count on much more revenue for the foreseeable future when constructing your budgets. Now, she was recommending, although she didn't use the words, a top-down budget approach, because she said, and I'm going to talk a bit about top-down today, because she said, start with the revenue when you do your budgeting. We have, over the years, done bottom-up approaches to budgeting, right up until almost now. We still do some of it, in both the school system and the town. You don't do top-down budgeting. Now, I'll talk a bit more about it later, but just to let you know that when times are good and money's rolling in and got a good track record and revenue, more additional profitable recurring money is coming into town every year, and factories are coming here, and shopping centers are coming here, stores are coming here, people are buying houses here and improving them, values are going up for property, all that. That's when people usually do bottom-up budgeting. They go out to everybody and they ask them what they would like in their budget, and then they put it in there. And they try to get the taxpayers to pay it. If the taxpayers say yes, they get it. They tend to be a little more lenient in prospering times than they are in recessionary times like we're in now. But top-down budgeting is usually used when you're in a turnaround situation like we are, and have been for many years, or in trouble like we are, and financially, and have been for many years. That's when you start to do, as Ms. Wall suggested, do your revenue first, and then consider what expenses you will have. Talk about that later. And that's going to have to happen for quite a few years when constructing our budgets. We must look at doing top-down budgets. When budgetings start with revenue and then do a top-down budget rather than the usual bottom-up approach, we can then begin to control our own destiny. Ms. Wall also said in her first public statements at a select meeting that the mill rate will have to be increased by 25% for a flat budget this year. That assumes we spend no more money than we did in the next budget than we do in this budget we have now. Matter of fact, it's not quite that simple because our budget right now is under on revenue and over on expenses. So we can't repeat that again. We have to do a balance there. We have to figure out what the important activities are and move the money in that direction. And some of the wants and needs of the town won't be able to be addressed for quite a while. We won't get rich overnight. The devil is in the details. Once we get all the details, we'll begin to see the devils. And we'll have to address those devils in the detail. Ms. Wall thought the mill rate would have to be increased by about 25% for a flat budget. This turned out to be, as of today, maybe different tomorrow or next week or next month, 18.5% for various reasons. We still do have appeals going on revaluations. That won't make too much of a difference, I don't think. But nothing will be settled there until all those appeals are done and we know exactly what we need to do to meet this year's budget requirement. And the 18.5% is to make up for the average revaluation drop in property values of about 16.5% or so, maybe 17. But when you're down at a number like that, then you have to take the percentage of that number that gets you back to where you were before. Therefore, you will need 18.5% to make up for the 16.5% or so drop. Now again, I mention this on every program because it is budgeting time and it is an election year. The Democrats and the town manager, from what I can see, would like you to believe that you're not getting a tax increase this year. Well, some people are getting a tax increase because the 18.5% is an average. Some people will get a decrease because the 18.5% is an average. Some have done things on their property to make them more valuable. Other people have done things to make them less valuable. So everybody, one way or another, will be paying more for less. You will have 3/4 of an apple, but you'll be paying for a whole apple. And I've heard a lot of bad feedback around town, not only about that, but also about the increase in the water and sewer fees. To many people, 20% for water and 35% for sewer, it won't break their back. But if they also have a tax increase on their property, it might. I went to the water and sewer public hearing on the 20th of this month, and there were a few people there who tried to blame the Water and Sewer Commission for their own mistakes, namely the selectman and former select person. And there are other people there that were more interested in understanding why they had to pay more for water and sewer when they couldn't afford it and their tenants couldn't afford it, when it was a big business, those were their words, not mine, financial management mistake that got us into this pickle. Why should the water and sewer users have to pay that increase? Now, they have no choice because we don't vote on that. They'll have no choice. Now, of course, what will happen is the water and sewer usage will go down. If people pay more, they're going to try to figure out how they can pay less, and they will reduce their consumption where it's practical. The devil is in the details. A separate audit of the Water and Sewer Commission found financial affairs commenced and recommendation by the new auditing firm was to raise water and sewer initially for 8 years to enable the commission to pay the town back the reported $1.6 million that the Water and Sewer Commission owes to the town. Now this will be, at this rate with these new rates, they'll be paying back about $400,000 a year if all turns out to be equal, which it won't be. We already know that the Water and Sewer Commission has lost about $125,000 from one customer that won't be using our facilities anymore. Transferred to Barkhamsted. That was brought up in newspaper articles, I guess. I didn't see them, but at the public hearing on the 20th. That's a big concern, of course. And it leads people to believe, even the chairman of the Water and Sewer Commission mentioned, that we may have to raise rates again soon. Matter of fact, they'll be reviewed every year, I'm sure, quite carefully. And that's not going to be a pleasant experience. When the past town manager was discussing with the, and I only hear this from various people, I wasn't there, with the schools in the town that they merged the computer systems, he was told all the reasons it couldn't be done, from what I hear. And I also hear that he said, stop. Don't give me any more reasons why it can't be done. I've done it all over the world for years. Whenever we did an acquisition or merged with another company, it was always a very high top priority. So we can't say that it can't be done. The Water and Sewer Commission has always been very positive. They've always tried to increase distribution of their water and sewer. Often against the wishes of the extreme environmentalists we have in our community. I've always tried to make it tough to do so. I still think there's a bit of that going on. There are people that don't want to see the water and sewer lines extended around any further in town, especially in their backyard, and don't want to see them go down the enterprise corridor, because then factories might go down there. We do have problems in the enterprise corridor because it has a lot of slate down there in the ground, and it's hard to do septics, and people need water of a certain pressure to run their sprinkling systems if they're a factory, and the sprinkling systems are mandated, of course. And they certainly don't want to see anything grow too much in the backyard of Highland Lake or Winchester. So we do have the extremists on either side of the issue, and as a result, we're not making too much progress. Seems pretty simple. The town was pressured by the lack of increasing profitable, recurring tax revenue, and exasperated by the inability to raise taxes over the last 4 or 5 years, especially since the recession, 2008. So they began to rob Peter to pay Paul, or they continued to rob Peter to pay Paul, hoping that more revenue would miraculously appear to bail them out of the dilemma that they find themselves in. And of course, the revenue did not appear and will not appear because we have no pipeline. Most of what we do now in the Economic Development Commission is very good. I commend them for that. But it's business as usual. And it's not going to get us where we need to go very rapidly. We need to raise our sights. We need to concentrate on finding businesses that want to come into our town, finding developments that want to come into our town, finding factories that want to come into our town, finding anything that wants to come into our town that will add to our profitable recurring tax bill. Now, let me just explain profitable. A lot of people don't understand it. They say, we're a nonprofit. Well, we're really, when we talk profit, we mean businesses, etc., developments, factories that will provide jobs and will cost the town less money than they pay into the town for services. It's that simple. Businesses like Howmet, businesses like Samuel D. Bronson used to be until they left. They were in the top 10 until they were no more in Winsted, etc., etc. Moving a business in to an area where a business just left that was of equal size is business as usual and won't get us ahead. But it still needs to be done because we don't want to go backwards. So the EDC, in my opinion, spends most of its time trying to keep us from going backwards. They always say they don't have enough money to work with. But I was on the EDC one year when they didn't do the proper paperwork to carry forward their budget to the next year and lost probably $20,000. And that's what doesn't make any sense to me. I brought it to her attention many times, didn't do it, lost the money. It got transferred towards the end of the year to someone else. Now I'm going to put up another slide, budgeting top-down versus budgeting bottom-up, because I want to talk a bit about that. I was once a director of systems and technical support for the Americas division of UNIVAC. now Unisys, for Canada, America, and South America. When I crafted my new budget for the coming year, I went to my direct reports, and they went to theirs, and together we crafted a bottom-up budget, which was common at the time in most bureaucratic companies. When I worked for Univac, it was about $1 billion company. Today, these guys are tens of billion-dollar companies. The result of the bottom-up budget that we crafted was a 30% projected increase in a current $500 million or so budget. When I presented this to my boss, Jeffrey Cross, he later won the Queen's Award for turning International Computers Limited in London, ICL, around. And I was a member of his team. But at the time, he was vice president of the Americas Division, and he said to me, "Brian, you are only getting a 1% increase because these are tough times, and we need to do a top-down budget. The revenues are down, and we can't afford that kind of an increase anymore. While you are at it, we need to close down the Phoenix Development Center." I said, "But it's only a month until Christmas. Can I wait until after Christmas?" I was about 28 at the time. He replied, "No. No," a hard word to say in business, a hard word to say in your family. Always a hard word to say. Yes is the more acceptable answer for everything. Do it now, before the employees spend a lot of money for Christmas that will only make their matters worse. And oh yes, please include in your budget money for growth. And you might have to cut expenses in another area to free up enough to invest in our growth. So what he was basically saying is, reduce and restructure because we're in tough times. If I wanted our future budgets to grow, we had to make those hard calls. I went back to my direct reports, and they were mad as hatters because they were not going to get the money that they were convinced they needed and had already mentally spent. And they had to close the development center weeks before Christmas. They weren't happy about that. Thought it was unreasonable, didn't understand the implications of not closing the center or the implications on the employees if we waited too long to do so, and they spent a lot of money on Christmas. We redid the budget, and I went to Phoenix personally and announced the closing of the center. It was not a happy experience for me, and it was not a happy experience for the people who worked in Phoenix. They loved the town. I used to live in Phoenix for a year and a half, worked at Luke Air Force Base on the computers for the Air Force. Joyce and I lived in Phoenix. She went to a couple schools there, Phoenix College and Arizona State. It was not a happy experience, but it was a necessary experience. We have the same sort of problems here in our town and in our school system, mainly the school system. We need to address those problems now. Right now. We need to make hard, tough decisions. Let's close a school. Let's close 2 schools. Let's integrate all the computer systems with the town, and vice versa, in Gilbert. Let's cut out all the duplication in services that we have throughout our various groups. They're tough decisions. But then we'll have some money to invest in our future. The main complaint you will hear now if you watch television programs is, we don't have any money, we can't get anything done. I always say good entrepreneurial people can get things done with no money. And I suggested a lot of ways to do that over the last few years. The next year, when I was preparing my budget, I went to the vice president before we began to craft the budget. And I asked how much revenue would be available to us this year for our budgets. And he told me what he thought I would have for revenue, which wasn't very much, additional revenue. And we budgeted for that amount top down. That was my introduction to top-down budgeting in tough economic times. Ms. Wall suggested we do the same here. She didn't think it was going to be, at least when I heard her in the meetings, didn't think it was going to be a banner year for getting money from the taxpayers, and she's probably right about that. And to get money of $1 million for the fund balance when you already owe a couple million isn't going to help much at all. That's budgeting the wrong way. As interim Finance Director Jane Wall advised our finance board a month or 2 ago, revenue will be flat for some time to come. I'm repeating myself here on purpose. Budget for revenue first, and then determine which expenses you want to include. The fiscal conservative Republican Finance Board members are advising the Finance Board to reduce the inefficient school budget. They won't listen. They don't want to do it. Challenge the MBR and the town manager to come up with a list of options for reducing expenses enough to include money for growth in the projected flat budget. This must be done. This must be done. We do not have a rich uncle. Conservatively budget the expected revenue first by month, then by quarter, then by year. Once that is achieved, budget the expenses by priority, top down. For example, critical debt obligations, bonds, etc., top priority. Debt obligations, top second in priority, where it can be done. School necessities, where absolutely necessary. Town necessities, where absolutely necessary. Restructuring necessities, where absolutely necessary. Show the mounting debt will be under control, and you will win the respect of the taxpayers. And once we can show balanced budgets with responsible management and results, because we're all results oriented with our money, we won't get the support of the taxpayers. We must show them that we're responsible and that we can manage their money properly. Otherwise, we'll be in trouble. With that, I will say thank you very much for watching the program.